My name's Chris, I'm 38, and my wife's name is Jessica, who's 35. We've been married for 8 years, together for 10. She has a son from a previous relationship, Ryan, who's 20. I've always treated Ryan like my own, especially since his biological father was never in the picture. I thought we were this happy little blended family. But now I'm writing this because my world is in shambles. Jessica has always been complicated. She's beautiful, sharp, and confident, but she has this knack for manipulating situations. The subtle, like she knows how to twist things to make you feel guilty even when you didn't do anything wrong. But I loved her for her fire, her ambition, and the way she could walk into a room and own it. Or at least I used to. The first cracks in our marriage started about a year ago. Jessica started going out more often, claiming she was meeting up with her girlfriends for wine nights. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'm not the insecure, controlling type. But over time, her behavior started to change. She'd come home later and later, sometimes smelling like cologne. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh it off and tell me I was being paranoid. "You're imagining things, Chris," she'd say with that fake sweet tone she uses when she wants to shut me down. Still, I brushed it off. I wanted to trust her, but there were moments I couldn't ignore. Like when she suddenly changed her phone password after years of using the same one we both knew. Or when she became oddly defensive if I walked into the room while she was texting. I chalked it up to stress or her need for some privacy. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the weirdness with Ryan. He and Jessica have always been close, which makes sense. She raised him on her own before we got together. But recently, their relationship started to feel off. They'd exchange these strange looks during dinner, or I'd catch them whispering to each other and stopping abruptly when I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining it. Who thinks like that? But now, looking back, I wonder if part of me always knew. At the time, though, I didn't push it. I kept telling myself, Jessica's my wife. Ryan's my stepson. This is my family. I couldn't even fathom the idea of what I was about to discover. Everything came crashing down 2 weeks ago. It was a Friday night, and I'd just come home from work a little earlier than usual. Jessica hadn't mentioned any plans for the evening, so I expected to find her in the living room, maybe scrolling through Instagram or watching one of her trashy reality shows. Instead, the house was oddly quiet. Ryan's car was in the driveway, which wasn't unusual since he still lived with us while going to college nearby. But something felt off. I called out, "Jess? Ryan?" But there was no answer. That's when I noticed her purse on the kitchen counter. She never left it lying around like that. My gut started to twist, but I still tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was napping. Maybe Ryan had his headphones on. I walked upstairs, and the second I reached the hallway, I froze. I could hear muffled voices coming from our bedroom. Jessica's voice, and Ryan's. My heart dropped. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Were they arguing? Laughing? What could they possibly be doing in there? I crept closer, my palms sweating. I don't know why I didn't just barge in. I guess I was scared of what I might find. But then I heard it. Jessica's voice, breathy and low, saying something that made my blood run cold. "You're so much better at this than your father." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. For a moment I thought I might pass out. My hand was shaking as I pushed the door open. And there they were, Jessica and Ryan, tangled up in our bed, so caught up in each other that they didn't even notice me at first. I can't even describe the rage, the betrayal, the disgust that surged through me in that moment. "What the actual fuck is this?" I shouted. They both jumped, scrambling to cover themselves. Jessica's face went pale, but Ryan just looked guilty, like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar. "Chris, it's not what it looks like," Jessica blurted out. Pulling the sheets up around her like that would somehow erase what I'd just seen. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you're screwing your son in my bed." I couldn't even control my voice. It was raw, shaking with fury. Ryan mumbled something about it being a mistake, that it just happened. Jessica, ever the manipulator, immediately switched into damage control mode. "Chris, please, let me explain. You don't understand. It's not like that." "Not like what? You think I'm blind? Or stupid?" I was yelling at this point, my voice echoing off the walls. How long has this been going on? Jessica started crying, big, dramatic sobs, the kind she always uses to turn herself into the victim. It was a one-time thing. I swear it didn't mean anything, she pleaded, but I wasn't buying it. Not this time. I looked at Ryan, who wouldn't even meet my eyes. How could you do this, man? I treated you like my own son. He just shook his head, muttering, I'm sorry, Chris. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? What, you just tripped and fell into her? My voice was dripping with venom. I felt like I was losing my mind. Jessica kept trying to talk, to spin some kind of excuse, but I couldn't listen anymore. I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pull my phone out of my pocket. I needed air. I needed to get the hell out of there before I did something I'd regret. I left the house that night, not knowing if I'd ever come back. I drove around aimlessly for hours that night, my mind racing. I kept replaying what I'd just seen, what I'd heard, and every detail cut like a knife. Jessica's voice, her body language, Ryan's shame. It was all seared into my memory. I pulled into a parking lot, turned off the car, and just sat there in the dark, trying to piece myself together. I didn't cry, I was too angry to cry, but I felt like a part of me had just died. I ignored Jessica's calls. She kept texting me, alternating between apologies and demands for me to come home so we could talk. She even had the audacity to blame me for walking in without knocking, as if this was my fault. I didn't respond. What the hell could I say? Around 2 a.m., I finally went to a motel. I didn't want to go back to the house, our house. The idea of sleeping in that bed, in that room, made me sick to my stomach. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. How long had this been going on? Was I just some clueless idiot this whole time? And why? Why would Jessica betray me like this? With her own son, no less? The next morning, I woke up to more texts from her. At first, she was apologetic. I'm so sorry, Chris. Please come home so we can talk about this. Then came the excuses. I didn't mean for it to happen. You've been so distant lately, and I was lonely. And finally, the manipulation. You're overreacting. It wasn't even serious. It didn't mean anything. Don't throw our marriage away over one mistake. One mistake. One mistake. This wasn't like she kissed someone at a bar after one too many drinks. She had a full-on affair with her son under my roof in my bed, and she had the gall to minimize it. It made me angrier than I've ever been in my life. But what really sent me over the edge was when Ryan texted me. I'm sorry, Chris. I know I messed up. Please don't hate me. I'll move out if you want me to. Like he was the victim here. Like I was the one being unreasonable for feeling completely destroyed. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever, so later that day, I went back to the house. The second I walked through the door, Jessica was all over me, trying to hug me, crying her fake tears. Pushed her away. Save it, Jess. I'm not here to listen to your bullshit. She followed me into the kitchen, still sobbing. Chris, please, I love you. I don't want to lose you. I swear it was a mistake. It'll never happen again. I turned to her, my voice cold. How long has it been going on? Her face crumbled, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally tell me the truth. But of course she lied. It only happened once. I swear. That night. It didn't mean anything. Bullshit. I snapped. The way you two were acting around each other. The way you've been sneaking around for months. Don't insult me, Jessica. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. Okay, fine. It's been a few months. But I was confused, Chris. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt so disconnected from you. And Ryan was... He was just there for me. Just there for you? He's your son, Jess. How fucked up do you have to be to cross that line? She had no answer. She just kept crying, trying to play the victim. I couldn't stand to look at her. I walked out of the kitchen, straight into Ryan, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but I didn't care. I was done trying to be the understanding stepdad. You're moving out, I told him. Today. I don't care where you go. But you're not staying here. He nodded, his head down. I understand. I'll leave. Jessica tried to argue. Chris, please don't do this. He's just a kid. Don't. I interrupted her. You don't get to defend him. Or yourself. You made your choices, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. I left the house again after that. I didn't have a plan, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Jessica get away with this. If she thought she could destroy me and come out of this unscathed, she had another thing coming. After leaving the house, I drove aimlessly again, my mind clouded by anger and humiliation. I couldn't stop replaying Jessica's fake tears, her excuses, and Ryan's pathetic apologies. I felt trapped, powerless, like they had both walked all over me, and I had just let it happen. But then, as I sat in my car at some random park, it hit me. Why should I let them win? Why should I just take this lying down? If Jessica could disrespect me in the most disgusting way possible, then maybe it was time for her to feel some of the pain she'd caused me. And that's when the idea popped into my head. Jessica's mother, Diane. Diane was 57 but carried herself like she was a decade younger. She was charming, confident, and still very attractive. Over the years, Diane had always been warm and flirty with me. Not in an inappropriate way, but just enough to make me notice. I'd even joked about it to Jessica before, calling Diane her hot mom. Jessica would roll her eyes and laugh it off, clearly not threatened. Funny how things come full circle. I hadn't spoken to Diane since this whole mess started, but I figured now was as good a time as any. I texted her. Hi Diane. Hope you're doing well. I really need someone to talk to. Can I stop by? It didn't take long for her to reply. Of course, Chris. Come over anytime. What's going on? I didn't give her any details over text. I wanted this conversation to happen in person, where I could gauge her reaction and see if my plan was even feasible. I didn't think too far ahead. I just knew I wanted to hurt Jessica the way she had hurt me. And if anyone could help me do that, it was her mother. When I pulled up to Diane's house later that evening, she greeted me at the door with her usual warm smile. Chris, what's wrong? You look like you've been through hell. I stepped inside, and as soon as the door closed, the words just spilled out of me. I told her everything. Jessica, Ryan, the affair, the lies. Diane's face went from concern to horrified, and then to something I didn't expect. Rage. That little bitch, she hissed, pacing the living room. And with her own son? I can't believe she would do something so disgusting. I'll admit, her reaction caught me off guard. I expected sympathy, maybe a bit of shock, but Diane was furious. She sat down beside me on the couch and placed her hand on mine. Chris, you don't deserve this. You've always been too good for her. Hearing that felt like validation, like I wasn't crazy for feeling as betrayed as I did. But then Diane said something that completely changed the trajectory of the night. You know, Jessica's always been selfish. She's just like her father, always thinking she can do whatever she wants and get away with it. But not this time. There it was, an opening. I didn't hesitate. Diane, I don't know what to do. I feel like I've lost everything. She's destroyed me. Her hand lingered on mine, and her voice softened. You haven't lost everything, Chris. You still have people who care about you. I care about you. The tension in the room was palpable. Diane moved a little closer, her eyes locked on mine. Jessica's a fool. She doesn't appreciate what she has. If I were her, I'd never let you go. I leaned in slightly, testing the waters. You've always been so kind to me, Diane. More than Jessica ever was. Her cheeks flushed, and I knew I had her. You deserve better, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, before I could second-guess myself, I kissed her. When our lips met, I half expected Diane to pull away, to tell me I was crossing a line. But she didn't. She leaned into the kiss, her hands sliding up to my shoulders, pulling me closer. It was surreal, and for a moment, I forgot about Jessica, Ryan, the betrayal, everything. All I could think about was Diane and how much I wanted this. When we finally broke apart, she looked at me with a mixture of surprise and desire. Chris, she started, her voice trembling. Are you sure about this? I mean, after everything. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, I'm sure. I need this, Diane. I need you. Her hesitation melted away, and the next thing I knew, we were on her couch, tangled up in each other like two people who'd been holding back for far too long. It wasn't just physical, it was like a release, a way to channel all the anger, betrayal, and hurt into something that felt good for once. For the first time in days, I felt in control. Afterward, as we lay there catching our breath, Diane looked over at me, her fingers tracing lazy circles on my chest. I've wanted this for a long time, she admitted, her voice soft. I just never thought. I smiled bitterly. I never thought Jessica would destroy me like this. But here we are. Diane sat up, her expression serious now. Chris, I know this might have started as revenge, but I meant what I said earlier. You deserve better. You're a good man, and Jessica never appreciated that. I nodded, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to unpack what had just happened or what it meant. All I knew was that Jessica had shattered me, and now I was shattering her world in return. The next morning, I woke up to Diane making coffee in the kitchen, looking more radiant than I'd ever seen her. It was almost enough to make me forget why I was there. But then my phone buzzed. Another text from Jessica. Chris, we need to talk. Please come home. I'll do anything to fix this. I stared at the message for a long moment before showing it to Diane. She rolled her eyes. Typical Jessica, always trying to manipulate the situation. I smirked. She's in for a rude awakening. I decided it was time to confront Jessica. Not to reconcile, but to let her know exactly what I thought of her and to drop the ultimate bombshell. Diane insisted on coming with me, and honestly, I didn't mind. I wanted Jessica to see her mom standing by my side. When we walked into the house, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and puffy from crying. She looked up, relief flashing across her face, until she saw Diane standing behind me. Her expression shifted to confusion and then suspicion. What's going on? Jessica asked, her voice wary. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. I just thought you should know, Jess. You and Ryan aren't the only ones capable of betrayal. Her eyes darted between me and Diane, and then it clicked.
No.
You didn't. Tell me you didn't. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence hang in the air, watching as the realization hit her like a freight train. You're disgusting, she shrieked, standing up so fast her chair toppled over. How could you do this to me? To us? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You're seriously going to play the victim right now? After what you did with Ryan? That was a mistake, she shouted. It wasn't the same. Oh, it's exactly the same, I shot back. Except for one thing, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Jessica turned to Diane, her face twisted with rage. Mom, how could you? He's my husband. Diane, to her credit, didn't flinch. And Ryan's your son. So maybe you should sit down and think about what you've done before pointing fingers. Jessica looked like she was about to explode. She started screaming, throwing accusations at both of us. But I didn't care. I'd done what I came to do. I'd shown her that she wasn't untouchable, that actions have consequences. Jessica's screaming eventually turned into incoherent sobs. She sank to the floor, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what was happening. You've ruined everything, she muttered, over and over. I looked at her, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel love. I felt nothing. The woman sitting on the floor, crying into her hands, was no longer my wife. She was a stranger. Diane, on the other hand, stood tall, unbothered. She crossed her arms and looked down at Jessica. You ruined everything, Jessica. You can't blame Chris for finally standing up for himself. You made your bed, literally, and now you get to lie in it. I couldn't help but smirk at that. Diane had a way of cutting through the nonsense, and watching Jessica's face twist with rage was oddly satisfying. What now? Jessica finally asked, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. What do you want, Chris? A divorce? To humiliate me? I took a deep breath. I don't know yet, but I know I can't stay here. I can't stay married to you. Not after this. Her expression crumpled again, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to give her. I turned to Diane. You ready to go? Jessica's jaw dropped. You're leaving with her? Are you serious right now? I didn't bother responding. I just grabbed my keys and walked out, Diane following close behind. Over the next few days, I started piecing my life back together. I stayed at a friend's house while I sorted out my next steps. Jessica kept texting me, alternating between begging me to come back and threatening to expose my affair with Diane to anyone who would listen. First, I was worried. What would people think if they found out? But then I realized I didn't care. I wasn't the one who had slept with my stepson. If Jessica wanted to air our dirty laundry, she'd only end up embarrassing herself. Diane and I stayed in touch. She was surprisingly supportive, checking in on me and offering to help however she could. I don't know if what happened between us was just a one-time thing or the start of something more, but for now it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally free of Jessica's manipulation. Ryan, meanwhile, moved out of the house and into a friend's apartment. He sent me a long text apologizing for everything and saying he didn't blame me for cutting ties with him. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I'll forgive him, but not today. It's been a few weeks now, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. Jessica's lies, her manipulative tendencies, the cracks in our marriage that I chose to overlook. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that trust is everything. Without it, a relationship is nothing but a house of cards, waiting to collapse. As for Jessica, I don't know what her future holds, and I don't care. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them. I'm focused on moving forward, on rebuilding my life and figuring out what makes me happy. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. And don't let anyone make you feel like you're overreacting. You deserve honesty, respect, and love. As for me, well, I don't know what's next. But I know one thing. I'll never let someone like Jessica destroy me again. And that's it. That's my story.